What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, undefeated 3-division world champion, former junior welterweight undisputed world champion, currently the reigning WBO World Boxing Organization welterweight world champion, who is widely considered by many to be the #1 best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, in Terence "Bud" Crawford, who has 38 wins, no losses, no draw, 29 big wins by way of knockout. He is 34 years of age, 5'8", with a 74-inch arm reach. With that said, Terence Crawford, he doubles down on his legacy and his future. Okay, and Terence Crawford, he lets it be known that there's going to be some big shoes to fill for the generation coming up behind him after he beats Errol Spence Jr., undefeated, newly crowned 3-belt unified welterweight world champion superstar boxer, who is widely considered by many to be top 3 best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. Errol Spence Jr. is 28 wins, no losses, no draw, 22 big wins by way of knockout. He is 32 years of age, 5'9.5" with a 72-inch arm reach. That's Terence Crawford's biggest rival. And then he states that he's going to be undisputed at welterweight. So should he beat Errol Spence? Errol Spence holds the WBC, the IBF, and the WBA, okay? So should Terence Crawford beat Errol Spence, he'll be undisputed. So he was already undisputed at junior welterweight. Now he'll be undisputed at welterweight. And then he wants to face off against Errol Spence's stablemate and close friend in two-time junior middleweight world champion, who's the unified junior middleweight world champion currently as it stands, going into an undisputed massive showdown and rematch, being Jermell Charlo. Okay, so he stated that he wants to face off against Jermell Charlo, who's 34 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw. Okay, Jermell Charlo is 18 wins by way of knockout. And so Terence Crawford is stating that, you know, he wants to face off Jermell Charlo afterwards. So Jermell Charlo, like I said, is going into a massive undisputed rematch with undefeated WBO junior middleweight world champion Brian Castano. That's coming up this Saturday, May 14th, okay, in Los Angeles. So with that said, he stated that I'm going to be undisputed in 3 separate weight classes. Jermell Charlo, Terence Crawford clearly makes his makes it very clear that he doesn't fancy Jermell Charlo, okay? And so with that said, you know, he stated that, you know, once I beat Errol Spence Jr., I'm going to become undisputed at welterweight, and then I'm going to become undisputed at junior middleweight. Jermell Charlo is the favorite in this fight. The first fight with Brian Castano ended in a draw. So Jermell Charlo fight, it ended in a draw, okay? Now, many people felt like it shouldn't have ended in a draw. Many people feel like it should have ended, you know, in Brian Castano's favor, and then there's people that feel like it should have ended in Jermell Charlo's favor, okay? But, you know, when it comes to Terence Crawford and Jermell Charlo, he holds nothing back. He already stated that, you know, he's going to beat Errol Spence, and then he's going to go up and beat Jermell Charlo, who's a cheerleader. So Jermell Charlo, you know, is 31 years of age. He'll be 32 this month. 6 feet tall with a 73-inch arm reach, okay? Like I said, he's facing off against Brian Castano. Brian Castano with 17 wins, no losses, 2 draws, 12 wins by way of knockout. 32 years of age, 5'7.5" with a 67.5-inch arm reach. So Terence Crawford, he says that he's gonna, he has some big shoes that he's laying out. He fills some big shoes. Now he's laying even bigger shoes, and for the generation coming up behind him, it's going to be even more difficult for them to fill those massive shoes that he is laying forth, okay? Now, what's interesting, obviously, about this entire situation is that, you know, Terence Crawford, he started his career at 130. He was a champion at 135, 140, 147. Should he accomplish that? Should he beat Errol Spence Jr. and become undisputed at welterweight, okay, and then go up to junior middleweight and beat Jermell Charlo, okay? Yes, that would be some massive shoes for the generation coming up behind him to fill, okay? undisputed in 3 separate weight classes is enormous. And the people and the fighters that he will have to go through to do so is even bigger. Okay, that is huge on the part of Terence Crawford. Okay, if he is able to accomplish this feat, and yes, that would be, you know, some massive shoes to fill. Now, Terence Crawford, I believe, is already setting the stage for retirement. I believe if Terence Crawford beats Errol Spence and then beats Jermell Charlo, Terence Crawford is going to retire. He's going to call it a career, okay? I don't see Terence Crawford, you know, continuing his career, you know, after that, okay? Defending the titles and things of that nature. He's already stated that he don't want to fight into his late 30s and definitely not into his 40s, okay? And so with that said, that's an uphill challenge for Terence Crawford, okay? Because the physicality of the guys that he's talking about facing off against, the size of these guys, he's the smaller guy, right? And so, yeah, that makes it, you know, he's setting the table for, you know, big shoes to be filled, okay? I personally think that Terence Crawford would lose one of those fights. I actually favor Errol Spence to beat Terence Crawford, okay? Terence Crawford, versatile, power in both hands, has knocked out 10 of his last 11 opponents, okay? Dating back all the way to his Victor Postal fight, Derry Jean and Hank Lundy, when he was at 130, 135, okay? 10 of his last 11 opponents, Terence Crawford has knocked out. The problem is with Terence Crawford is that time is not on his side. He'll be 35 years of age, okay? He'll be 35 in September, okay? So looks like by the time this Errol Spence fight happens with Terence Crawford, he'll be 35 years of age, okay? And Terence Crawford's biggest advantage is his ability to be versatile. Extremely long arms, 5'8" with 74-inch arm reach. So he has the same length arms, or if not longer arms, than Jermell Charlo, okay? And he has power in both hands. He switches from southpaw to orthodox. But he's no longer as versatile and as effective in an orthodox stance as he once was. Once upon a time, Terence Crawford would fight in the orthodox stance, and you couldn't touch him. You go back and look at the Brettis Prescott fight, you know, the Victor Postal fight. You know, when he was in the orthodox stance, he was just as effective as he was in the southpaw stance. Now, today's time, Terence Crawford is clearly more comfortable in the southpaw stance. It gives him a southpaw advantage with his extremely long arms and the power in both hands. You know, it gives him an advantage, okay? When you look at fights now, today's time, when he's in the orthodox stance, right, he's not as elusive, okay, as he once was. He gets hit, he's not comfortable in that stance as he once was. Immediately, as soon as he starts to have, you know, not to have success, he switches to give, and you're gonna hear people say, well, he switches to give himself an advantage, right? Because he doesn't have the advantage in the orthodox stance. He's not comfortable in the orthodox stance, okay? And because of that, he has to switch his stance to give himself an advantage. So people say, well, that's to confuse his opponents. Well, if it's not broken, then why are you fixing it? Okay? For instance, how many rounds have you ever seen Errol Spence lose in his career? Okay? Maybe the fight with Kell Brook saw him lose rounds against Kell Brook. Okay? If you look at the Kell Brook fight, that's the fight that you could say, oh, Errol Spence was losing some rounds. Outside of the Kell Brook fight and some rounds against Sean Porter, right? Errol Spence doesn't have to make an adjustment when it comes to his stance to give himself an advantage. He just makes an adjustment to what you're doing. He doesn't make an adjustment to give himself an advantage. He makes the adjustment to what you're doing, and then he adapts, and then he beats you at what you're doing. You understand? If you have to give yourself an advantage, that means that you're no longer comfortable in that stance, because Errol Spence and Sean Porter and Danny Garcia and Floyd Mayweather, and the list goes on and on and on. They're not switching stance to give themselves an advantage, because the advantage is adjusting to what you're doing. He's switching to get an advantage for himself because he's not comfortable in doing what he's doing. So if he stayed orthodox, would he win the fight? Is the question. Would he have the success and win the fight if he stayed in the orthodox stance? That's the question that would need to be asked. You understand? So with that said, I think the Jermell Charlo size, strength and fundamentals, along with Errol Spence, is just going to prove to be too much for Terence Crawford. Now, I could be wrong. They're 50-50 fights. Terence Crawford is a great fighter, and he can make adjustments when it comes to the southpaw stance. But when you look at the fight with Igor Kavalauskas, and people look at the end results, they don't look at the fight itself and the level of opponent. That's what ultimately what you have to look at. Okay. Yes, his talent level is above that of Sean Porter when it comes to boxing. It's above that of Igor Kavalauskas. It's above that of Jose Benavidez Jr. Jeff Horn. The list goes on and on. Terence Crawford is a better talent than they are. Period. Okay, so talent prevails, and that's what happened. His talent prevails. He's a better talent than they are. Okay. So when he needs to make an adjustment to the physicality, he switches to the southpaw stance, but he's just definitely not comfortable with the physicality on the inside. When Igor Kavalauskas is on the inside, and he dropped him unofficially, okay? Even Terence Crawford was asked about that, and he said, yeah, he dropped me, but he still lost. Well, that's the end results. And the problem is, you're comparing Igor Kavalauskas to a better talent of Jermell Charlo and Errol Spence on the inside. They're not going to just get dropped. They're not going to fade. They're not going to go away like Igor Kavalauskas. They're not going to get knocked out and, not be able to make adjustments or not be able to take his punches, right? Now, obviously, we have to see if they could take his punches. But for the most part, they're a better talent. They're a greater talent. They're on an equal talent level as he is. But they're stronger and bigger and more physical than he is. Okay, so when you're dealing with Sean Porter inside pressure, Sean Porter is 5'7" with a 69-inch arm reach, and he doesn't have a lot of power. Okay, Sean Porter is not a big puncher, so you make an adjustment to Sean Porter, and he's not bringing that type of power that Jermell Charlo and Errol Spence is bringing, and the work rate that Errol Spence and Jermell Charlo is bringing, and the durability of Errol Spence and Jermell Charlo. Right? It's a completely different scenario. So people have to stop looking at the end results and just saying, yeah, well, he knocked them out. Yeah, that's the end results. But look at the talent level. His talent, the cream always rises to the top. So he's the cream. He's the cream of the creme in these fights. So the cream rose to the top. Right? The talent level separated itself. But there's no talent gap between him and Jermell Charlo and him and Errol Spence. So is he going to be able to separate himself when he starts to get in trouble with them? They're not going to succumb. They're not going to fade. He has to make the adjustment. That's where the most important part comes in. That's what makes it so interesting. Can he make those adjustments like he did against other fighters and have the same success against a Jermell Charlo and an Errol Spence Jr.? That's what needs to be seen. But that's all I got for y'all. Let's see how this unfolds and plays out. Make sure you hit the like button. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. You haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all in one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to New Media. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. And I agree. If he succeeds and he beats Errol Spence and beats Jermell Charlo, those are some massive shoes for the generation coming up behind him to fill, for sure. And that's going to put him at an all-time great, no doubt about it. So that's all I got for y'all. Peace.